Toronto's traditional spring housing market has kicked off in favour of buyers. Prices were down and new listings rose from the same time last year, so more homes available to buy. That's according to the report from the Toronto Regional Real Estate Board. Now, warmer weather typically heralds the busiest season for housing markets across the country. But April's rise in listings in Toronto is in stark contrast to last year when there was a dearth of homes for sale, and that fueled a short-term price surge. We're joined now by Ron Butler, mortgage broker at Butler Mortgage. Always great to see you. Talk to us about Toronto, biggest housing market. Are we seeing sellers anxious to move on, get their houses on the market?
Well, it's a kind of a divergent market. We have to note that this is really a lousy outcome for April compared with the 10-year average. And the growth in new listings is fairly concentrated in one area, which is typically rental condominiums. Oh. So that seems to be the biggest surge in the available new listings.
Bought presumably by investors, and are some of them underwater now with the rise in variable rates?
Well, there's lots of things going against them. There is the constant increase in renewal rates, as you just pointed out. Nobody who gets a renewal today is getting a lower rate or a lower payment. They're getting a higher rate and a higher payment. And let's face it, the push against Airbnb by many municipalities is starting to affect those people who had been running Airbnbs. It's just sort of a bad news story for rental investors for the last little while.
Sorry, what about for renters, things getting a little bit better?
Sure. We looked at rents down slightly throughout the GTA. That's positive for the people who are renting. However, for the people who are looking to sell those rental units, it's again not a good story.
What about people who are selling their principal residence? I know it's a mug's game trying to predict where houses are going, but do you think people will be well advised, get them on the market now, sell them while they have a chance?
Yeah, that is a difficult question because, of course, there's some houses that are sought after neighborhoods, sought after houses, even particular streets where people have been waiting for years to buy. And when a house shows up, they're pounced on. There's other neighborhoods that are less desirable, and those listings do last. The most important thing I could tell anybody about listing in this market we're in right now, because May is off to a slightly slower start than April. So I can tell you that if you want to sell the house, be very careful about how you price it, because that seems to be the key. And it also doesn't hurt if the property is under $1 million. There seems to be more action in those areas than there is at the very high end.
So what was the rate? What's the price range that you see the action?
$1 million and less. Now, that's not a lot in Toronto, of course, Toronto 416. Yeah. But it is, in other areas, in Hamilton and those areas, there's some possibilities.
Ron, do you follow conditions across the country? If so, is there anything else leaping out for you with the housing market and other centres?
In Vancouver, which is a similar market to Toronto through the GTA, the Greater Vancouver area, it's an almost identical occurrence. It's this growing listings of rental condos and overall a slow market for everything, but this growing inventory of listings and rental condos. It's almost precisely the same as the recent Trump report.
Right, so plenty of listings. And is it also the rental condos that are coming on the market?
Clearly, yeah, that's the inventory that has got the biggest boost.
What about the condo buildings that we've seen sprouting around Toronto? A typical condo building in Toronto, what % of the units would be rental? Could you hazard a guess? I know it's a very hard question.
It's actually not that difficult in small buildings, like buildings which might only have 40 or 35 units. That's almost exclusively owner-occupied. That's a boutique development designed for owner-occupied situations. But for the 200, 300 unit towers, that's about 80% or more investors, rental units. Those are all planned to be rented.
80%? I had no idea.
Oh yeah. In the world of small condos, sub 500 square feet, they're almost exclusively not owner occupied.
So that if this goes on, if these investors are under pressure, we could see steady supply then of these units on the market.
There's another interesting twist to it. The more of these new units, the cranes that you see, when those finally finish, they were purchased years ago for even higher square footage cost than the existing sales of these small rental units today. So you've got to question yourself, like, how is that going to work out? Those have to be bigger mortgages, potentially, possibly higher rents to justify the increased price. And right now, we're at a tipping point on the pricing of these small rental units. So, yeah, the next year is going to be very interesting indeed.
How does that fit into the governance of these condo buildings? Always fascinates me. That's one reason why I don't think I'd buy into a condo project myself. I wouldn't want to have to deal with that committee or board. But so if units start being sold at a huge pace, will that impact the governance? Will people be worried? Hey, who are buying these new units? Will they be willing to pay for upkeep of the building?
You know, I think it's safe to say that, by the way, Ontario has a very well-managed condo act. There has to be a constant stream of reserve checks, engineering reviews, as opposed to Florida, when sometimes the condos fall down, regrettably. We have the opposite in Ontario. It's a very strict act. Reserves must be kept. Engineering studies must be maintained. Not to say that all condos are perfect, but it's a pretty well-governed situation. Okay. At the end of the day, though, you're right. If the building is being sold at lower prices, there's going to be that many more potential rental tenants. But the boards are geared for rental. And in a building that was originally sold even 5 years ago as an almost exclusively rental building, the boards completely understand what they have to do.